Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This video I'm going to be talking about different ways to structure your code for object-oriented programming in Luau in the Roblox Engine. And so Roblox Luau is a type of object-oriented programming called prototype-based, as opposed to the most popular class-based approach. But these terminologies and such don't really matter in practice. They're just interesting if you ever want to research into them. So I have a server script, which is inside of server script service, and I also have a module script named object, just for the example. Now, you can do object-oriented programming without module scripts. Of course, you just use module scripts whenever you want to, I guess, organize your code and like share the objects between different scripts. But I just used a module script because it's kind of the standard to do that. And I required the module from inside the script. So I'm going to start with the classic approach to object-oriented programming that's most, I guess, like taught and most done. So inside the module script, I'm just going to name, and it's also common practice to name the class table. It's technically called a prototype table, but again, terminology doesn't really matter. But it's technically good practice to name the class table after what the module script name is. So I'm going to say local object, and I'm going to equal to a table. And then you have to set the index key equal to the object itself, because we're going to use the metatable approach. That's the most popular, and that's what people think of usually when you say object-oriented in Roblox. And then we'll just have a silly function such as say hello, and let's see, I could say name. Alright, so here I just created a silly function. It's of no use, but it's just for the example. Of course, you'd have uh, more than one line of code if you had a method such as this, but it's whatever. And then also I'm going to define a constructor function. So name. Alright, and here I set the metatable of a newly created table to object. So basically, whenever you try to index, for example, a method or just a function inside of this new table, since the index is set to the object table, it's going to search in the object table for the method, and that's what this is for. And then I'm going to set the name key equal to the parameter we pass, which is going to be used in the say hello function. And I'm just going to return self. And then I also have to return something from the module script, so I'm just going to return the object. So this is really the classic approach to how you structure like modules and such for object-oriented programming in Roblox. So in this server script, I can go ahead and say like local object a is equal to object.new, and we'll just pass in like Joe is. And then we can call a method such as object say hello. And so if I run this, see that Joe says hello because we passed Joe as the name, and then say hello is just going to say hello. Now, this is fine, and I have used this a lot in the past, but one thing I really just don't like about it, and I guess it's just like a preference thing I don't like about it, is you can use this new function inside of objects that you create from the quote-unquote class. Like, for example, I could say local object b is equal to object a dot new, and then I pass in like Sam, for example. And then if I call say hello, then you can see that I have two objects, but one of them was created with this weird way because new, or the constructor, is accessible by objects that you create from this. So after thinking about that, I was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna structure my code a little bit differently. I'm gonna just store this constructor somewhere else from this object table. So what I typically did was, let me copy this. What I typically did was I just returned a new table and I set, I set uh, a new key with a function, and it's basically the constructor here, so that this would actually be invalid right here. So if I try to run this, you see I get an error on line 6 because new is not a valid like function inside of the object anymore. Because the new constructor isn't inside of the metatable that the new object has. So, I did this for a while. Another approach is actually like, so I'll explain the benefits of doing this versus what I'm about to show. So another approach you could do is to literally just return a function from the module, and then in order to create objects, you would just call the return value as a function. Then let me erase this. So if I run this, you can see Joe still says hello because we're just calling a function. And the benefit of this is, I guess it just looks cleaner. I guess that's the only benefit. 1 second. Yeah, so I would say it just looks cleaner, but of course style doesn't matter all that much in my opinion. But if we go back to the other way, we actually have the capability of adding like additional constructors if we wanted to. And this is sort of the same idea as static functions in Java when creating classes. The static functions are like functions that are part of the class as opposed to the instances created from the class. So you could have like different constructors, you could have like functions that apply to like all the objects or something like that, but this is really nice, in my opinion. But yeah, so far I've shown really like 3 ways to structure your code for object-oriented programming. The first way was the classic way, and then we did returning it like this, where we can define additional constructors and not have them be accessible by the objects created from the prototype or class table. And then we also had the returning a function directly, which was like the main constructor type of thing. But the thing that's similar between all of those is they all used metatables. And metatables aren't really necessary for object-oriented programming in Roblox. So I'm going to show you a different way now. So I'm going to keep this, I'm going to put it back to object.new, and I'm going to remove the index key so you don't have to do index key anymore. And then for this right here, local self is equal to set metatable new table, set the metatable to object. I'm going to delete it, and instead of doing that, I'm just going to clone the object table. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this just to show you that it does run. So Joe says hello, and the reason for that is because we're cloning all of the items, or all of the all of the stuff inside of this object table, and it's being assigned into a new table, which self is referencing. And then we just define additional keys like self.name inside of that table. So this is the way I typically do it nowadays, and I'll get into that in a second. But real quick, I just want to clear up one thing. Uh, so when you clone this object table, you might be thinking, well, you're like cloning the functions into each object, so isn't that like a waste of memory or something? But it's actually the same function references inside of every object. And I'll actually prove that real quick. So if I have two objects, so let's get Sam back, and I can do warn object A dot say hello. So we're just indexing the function as a member of the table. Is equal to object B say hello. So we're not calling the functions, we're just indexing it. So this would return a function reference. So I'm just comparing the function reference inside of object A to the function reference inside of object B. So I run this, you can see it prints true, and that's because table.clone is a what's known as a shallow copy or a shallow clone. So it's not gonna actually clone and duplicate the functions in memory. It's all going to still reference the same things. So it's still like as memory efficient as the metatable way, and it's pretty neat. So now, the reason why I prefer using table.clone over the metatable way is the major part of it is just for simplicity. Like if a beginner wanted to learn how to do object-oriented programming, I would actually say it's more difficult to teach them the metatable way first, because it's always like just based on what I've seen like from people trying to learn it, versus this seems a little bit more intuitive because we're just like cloning all the stuff inside of the prototype table into the new object that we create. So I think that's pretty cool. And if you're worried about performance, there's pretty much no difference from based on my tests. Of course, I've only tested on my machine, but there's a very minuscule difference, and that minuscule difference is doing it this way. Calling the functions is slightly faster, and the reason for that is because with the metatable way, say hello isn't defined in like the new table. It's just that we had the metatable magic allow you to call it. So the metatable way, it would search self for the function, doesn't find it, and then it checks if there's a metatable. Well, it knows there's a metatable. I don't know exactly how it works under the hood, but it checks if there's a index pointing to some function, the underscore index key pointing to some function or a table, and if it points to a table, in which in this case it would point to a table, then it searches that table. So there's all these different steps, versus with this way we're just indexing. So we're cloning these function references, which are all the same, into the object itself, so it just indexes it inside of the new sorry, the new object. Which, of course, the speed difference I noticed between that was very, very like minuscule. And I'm sure Roblox does like optimizations and stuff under the hood for stuff like that. But it's for performance, there's quite literally no difference based on my tests. But yeah, I just think it looks a lot more like intuitive to do it this way. So this is the way I prefer to do it nowadays. Of course, you can miss out on some features like with the metatable approach. You could do stuff like is and then function and some object, and then you could return if the metatable of that object was equal to object. So you could do stuff like that with the metatable way if you wanted to. Uh, but I mean, you can still do stuff like that. Like you could define like self dot type, or I could say underscore type is equal to object, and then you could like reference like if the type is equal to the object. Of course, doing it this way does complicate things a little because you would have to access this outside of the script, which I mean, I guess you could just do object dot class is equal to object, and then outside the script you could check, you know, like warn object A type is equal to object dot class, and if you ran this, you know, it would return true. So there's a little more stuff you have to do with this way, and also I did stick to returning the constructor and stuff in from a new table so that objects can't call the constructor. But overall, I just think it's better for me personally when I'm coding because it makes more sense. Of course, I know how to use like metatables and all that, but I just think it looks better. And there's virtually no difference except for, I guess, readability for some people. But yeah, that's just showcasing some different ways that that you can structure your code for object-oriented programming in Roblox. If you like the video, hit that like button and subscribe, and thanks for watching.